بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Continuing in our monthly special lectures in the feminine journey, this week inshallah, this month inshallah, we have the topic which is of great importance, in fact requires much more attention than is given today. But inshallah ta'ala, we'll try our best to lay down some basics or foundations, inshallah ta'ala, in this topic, which is the importance of women giving da'wah and how they can go about doing so. And the truth be told, this topic is very important because it impacts the sisters directly, it impacts da'wah directly, it allows us as a community to upgrade and to aspire for greater ceilings and heights, to return our ways and ourselves back to the way of the Salaf Salih, the pious predecessors, and the earlier scholars, female scholars, as we'll look at today, who had a great legacy in da'wah, which sadly has been forgotten, and in today's time is in desperate need of being reminded. So inshallah ta'ala, I cannot guarantee that I'm going to be able to do justice to this topic, but what we'll do inshallah ta'ala is try to cover the major elements of it, which is to do with the importance of da'wah, how can sisters get involved, what is their role, examples of such da'wah efforts, etc. And inshallah, in the future, this can be a beginning to further work and research in this topic. And this is the second time I talked about this topic. We did a lecture like this before in the UK. I believe it was in Bristol. Alhamdulillah. And so this is like a similar, if not continued, maybe you could say like a second version of the same talk, inshallah ta'ala. So without wasting any time, because we started a little bit late here, this is a table of contents we hope to cover. Introduction, the importance of giving da'wah, the need for women to give da'wah, I should say, the qualities a caller needs, right? Da'iyah, what qualities they need, examples from Islamic history of female scholars in the da'wah, practical means now to give da'wah, and the conclusion. So inshallah ta'ala, we try our best to cover. And again, like I said, we're just going to touch on these different points. Otherwise, right, it would require like a separate course. But we've already done before, those sisters who follow us here in our Tuesday classes, we've already covered da'wah, the etiquette of da'wah. So alhamdulillah, that's already recorded, that class, that series. So something someone can return to for those who either need to be reminded of it or like to review it, or those who haven't been there. There's a class in etiquette of da'wah. So I highly recommend that. That's really helpful to figure out all the details of how to give da'wah and what is in the way of the prophets in giving da'wah. And a second resource I would recommend as well, before I show the main one, is the first special lecture we did in the feminine journey, which has to do with women and seeking knowledge. So I'm going to reference that one. It's on YouTube, because that lecture we spoke about how our sister can seek knowledge in this particular era with all her responsibilities and tasks. But also we looked at the example of Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha in more detail. So that's something in today's lecture I cannot do in detail. So I reference everyone to go back there to find out how did Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha become who she became. And to begin, the full foundation of my lecture is from this book, which is actually on audio, just which been transcribed by Sheikh Saleh Al Sheikh Abdul Ta'ala Sheikh, the senior scholar in Saudi Arabia. And the book has been translated, available in PDF. It's called The Female Caller and the Different Ways of Calling to Allah. Really nice book. It's not very long. It's available free in PDF. And here the Sheikh Hafizullah Ta'ala, he talks about the conditions for da'wah, the meaning of da'wah, the style of da'wah. So whoever hasn't read it or has not come across this book before, it's available free online in PDF. I highly recommend the sisters to read it and to go through it, because a lot of what I'm going to talk about comes from there. But also the fact that the Sheikh, he talks about in there, from amongst the different books that are available, his lecture seems to be the most, I found at least, beneficial and also very more what's called detailed about the topic. So highly recommend this, inshallah ta'ala. As we go along, I'm going to cite different passages from the Sheikh's book. Okay, to begin, we have to start with the most important part, which is giving da'wah itself. As we know, as Muslims, our job isn't just to be here. We need to be part of the da'wah. We need to be participating in this da'wah. And part of that is to first learn. And then when you learn, you teach. As we know, Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad Abdul rahimahullah told us and taught us in Usul al-Thalath or Thalath al-Usul that there's ilm. First you have knowledge, then amal, then action, then da'wah, then patience. So the key for the Muslim is to aspire in that direction. Right now, many of us, we're learning, we're studying, mashallah, and hopefully we're acting upon the knowledge that we have, and then we're aspiring to do da'wah and being patient. And again, just the origin of all of this in Surah Asr. So here are some of the evidences in summarized version of the importance of giving da'wah. Allah says in Surah Fussilat, and who is better than speech than one who says, my Lord is Allah, believes in his oneness and stands straight and acts upon his order and invites others to Allah's monotheism and does righteous deeds and says, I am from the Muslims. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us the best of people are those who do da'wah ila Allah. And this means then, as Muslims, if we want to be the best of people, we must be engaging the best of activities. Right? And this is again generally for men and women, as we'll see in a second. So we have to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ, who's better? And this reminds us that da'wah is one of the greatest things that you can do. We need to make time and effort, especially if you want to be part of this, right? Tremendous reward, but also the effort Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talking about. Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Ali bin Abi Talib, he told him, by Allah, if a single person embraces Islam with your hands, that would be better for you than red camels, Hadith Bukhari. And this is another encouragement that doing da'wah has a reward that cannot be, right, similar or cannot be emulated by other actions because it's one that's transitive. It reaches others. So if you guide someone to Islam, and likewise the scholars say, if you guide someone from innovation to Sunnah, so it doesn't have to be always guiding non-Muslims, guiding Muslims from misguidance to guidance, from ignorance to guidance. Every time they do something good, you get a share the reward. And this is the great encouragement that we never give up in trying to do da'wah and being part of it, even if it's at a small scale, because sometimes we think to ourselves, it's all or nothing. Right? Sometimes shaitan might come and say, well, who are you? What are you going to offer? Right? The big ulama, the senior scholars and students of knowledge and du'at out there. But that's not how we think. We have to think, okay, do I know something? Did I benefit something? Do I act upon some khair? Let me teach to others. So it's very important, especially as we'll see for the sisters, because this is what's lacking in our community on both sides. But for sisters, it's an acute problem, as we'll see why. Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah, he says in Jalal al-Afham that da'wah to Allah is the occupation of messengers and their followers. It's the wadifa, it's the occupation, the job of the prophets and messengers alayhi salam. Their primary role in our profession is da'wah. So if someone does da'wah in whatever capacity, you are following the footsteps of the greatest people to walk the earth. And he also said, rahimahullah, that the callers to Allah, they are special, the special servants of Allah and the best of the mysterious side of Allah in the highest in degree. May Allah make us from them. This is something that's really encouraging when we hear that they are not only the best, but if we do it sincerely for Allah, from the special people inside of Allah. And the last point he said, rahimahullah, Ibn Qayyim says, in fact, a person is not a true follower of Muhammad until he calls to God, yani Allah, with sure knowledge and insight. Furthermore, his followers are knowledgeable and carry out the Prophet's message by spreading knowledge, performing good deeds, guiding and advising people, being patient, striving for his sake. So this is the real point. If you are a true follower of Rasulullah, then you have to do da'wah. And when you do da'wah, you have to do it with knowledge and insight. So if you're true followers of Rasulullah, follow him, right? And what was the Prophet's primary job? He was a da'iyah. وَدَاعِيًا إِلَى اللَّهِ بِإِذْنِهِ وَسِرَاجًا مُنِيرًا. Allah called him a caller. Surah Furqan, Ahzab. Allah said, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is a da'iyan ila Allah bi'idhnihi. He's a da'iyah by Allah's permission. So if Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is a da'iyah, and we want to be like him, right? So if you want to be like him, then what do you have to do? You have to do what he does. And he does da'wah. But how does he da'wah? With knowledge and insight. Look what Allah said in this way, Ibn Qayyim is getting it from Surah Yusuf. Allah says, the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, Qul, say to the people, Hadihi sabili, this is my way. أدعو إلى الله على بصيرة أنا ومن اتبعني. Say Muhammad sallallahu to the people, this is my way. And I call to Allah upon insight. Insight is knowledge and piercing knowledge and deep knowledge and wisdom. So it's above just basic knowledge, it's insight. Insight is considered deep knowledge and wisdom. Ana, me, and whoever follows me. And that's why Ibn Qayyim said, if you're not a true follower until you do what he does, and you do that the way he does. Ana wa man ittaba'ani. Those, me and those who follow me. Right? So the benefit we take from all of this is that sisters should be engaged in da'wah. What's the proof? I mean, all of this is general, right? So some may say, where's the proof that this applies to the sisters? And we say that it's because of the principle we've taken before, and we remind the people of the principle again. That Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen mentioned this principle amongst other scholars. ما ثبت في حق الرجال ثبت في حق النساء إلا بدليل. That whatever has come in and is established in relation to the rights of men, that it likewise applies to the rights of women, except if there's a proof to say otherwise. So whatever has come established authentically that this is from the rights or the action that men should do, then it also applies to women unless there's a proof to say otherwise. So an example here, da'wah has come in general ayat and hadith. Can anyone say this is for the rijal only? No, prophethood and messengership, that's only for men. Da'wah is for both men and women. See the difference? So someone couldn't say, oh, no, women can't do da'wah. It's only for the men. No, women are going to do da'wah, but their da'wah will look different than that of the men, but they're still doing da'wah. And I want to go back to this principle later at the end of the lecture, because some of the problems we're having today is that people want, or sisters may think that their da'wah has to look like that of the men. When this will not be the same, because what I said, men are not like women, and we studied this before. But prophets and messengers, for example, are men. So we're going to see that some things that men can do in da'wah, for example, doing the public da'wah, the khutbahs, for example, and stuff like this, it doesn't take away from the women's role in da'wah. And we need to move away from this idea if it's going to be equality or nothing. And this is what's happening today, unfortunately, in our communities. That many of the imams or da'iyat are telling people that we can do da'wah just like men, and we're missing the mark, because who are the best women to do da'wah? Who are the great role models we're looking for? Are looking at? Did they do that? Let's go back. We're going to see it. But also we have to look at the general concept, which is da'wah is shared between men and women. But how to do da'wah is in accordance to what befits men and women. And we're going to see what that looks like. But otherwise, the same generality. So same messaging, women are teaching the same. So let's go now, move on to the need for women to give da'wah, because I think this is the problem that's really at hand. I cited this quote before for those who come in the Tuesday classes, and there are notes in the purification, women's purification rulings. But the statement Hafid ibn Jawzi rahimahullah in the beginning of his Ahkam al-Nisa, where he talked about the state of women in his era, and he died 597 Hijri, and he was lamenting and shocked about the level of ignorance that women had at his time. And it's not only women, as we'll see if you go to his book Talbis Iblis, his book Devil's Deception, he also talks about men too. Men have also a lot of ignorance, he said, at his time. But the women, he said here, I kept on instigating people to seek knowledge as it is the guiding light. But then I saw that women particularly were more needful of being awakened from heedlessness than men. And the reason why he's saying this, as we'll see, is because women have less access to scholarship, or let's say people of knowledge or scholars in comparison to men. And many of us would agree with that. It's a disparity, that there's more male callers than there are female callers. More halaqat dedicated to men's circles, right, of learning than women. So then look what he says, but then I saw that women, particularly more okay, young women are usually raised without having any knowledge or knowledge of anything from the Holy Quran, without knowing even how to wash menstruation, without knowing the basis of prayer, without being told what are the rights to do from her husband, etc. He just lists all the things that he noticed at his time. And again, here Hafiz ibn Jawzi rahimahullah is being very introspective. He's trying to find out what is the cause for this. So that's what's interesting. It's not just like he's blaming society. He's looking and saying what's going on. And later, he at the end of the introduction, he finds out there are some key points and reasons, and I'm going to get to. But we need to admit this is 597 Hijri, right? Right now, on 1446, right? 1446. So we're almost like 900 years, right? Maybe 850 years roughly from the time he said this? Are we any better as a society? This is a good question to ask ourselves. So the need for da'wah for women is more than that for the men, by a sheer reality that the disparity of numbers of those who are offering services or classes and guidance for the men, for men. So women are lacking in that, in the sense that they're not enough. And now I'm going to mention, and I mentioned before, I'm going to add some more points. I can Dawah Deception if you want more. Tadris Iblis in English translation, Dar Sunnah Birmingham. They have the translation of this book, 534 to 536. You get the translation of what he talks about, the same words he talks about there, about the women of his time, but also he has before that about men. Just in case someone says, why Ibn al-Jawzi is only attacking the women. Now he's also attacking the ignorance of the men, right? And the reason I'm saying that because some people they found Ibn al-Jawzi's instructions were some kind of, were not fitting or something. Again, I read a paper before from some Muslims or something. Again, it's not relevant here, but just go there if you want some more discussion. Let's talk about the real causes for this issue. Number one, parents not teaching their daughters the basics of deen. This is what Ibn Jawzi mentions, and this is something we all could admit. Many of us grew up not knowing enough about the basics of our deen. So that's number one. Number two, the lack of teachers and opportunities for sisters to learn the deen. And this is what we're trying to solve today by being, inshallah ta'ala, inspired to do more da'wah. We need more sisters to teach. We need more sisters to be having programs in the masajid, in the homes, reading books, sharing guidance. We need more sisters in those positions. Right? The need is dire. But since there's lack of it, you can always imagine then the sisters are going to be underserviced, and underserviced, they're going to have relatively more types of ignorance in some areas. Number three, for those who are married, husbands not teaching their wives to learn this knowledge, either because they don't know it themselves or they do know it, but they're lazy or negligent. And this is something which we talked about before. Islamically, the women have the right to be educated. Khatib al-Baghdadi, rahimahullah, right? The Muslim rulers should force the husbands of women and the masters of female slaves to teach them these things and the basics of deen. And now I'm going to bring you something more interesting. Ibn Hajj al-Maliki, he complains that at that time of the reality that he noticed. He died 737 Hijri. He was a Moroccan kind of, not Moroccan, but he's a Maghribi scholar from the Andalus, right? I think actually he died, maybe his date, if it's not correct there, if I think correctly. I'm going to double check, inshallah. But Ibn Hajj al-Maliki, he mentions in his time something very interesting. He says that if a woman asks to write regarding a matter of deen from her husband, okay, and ask the hakim regarding her education regarding the deen, as is her right, whatever husband educate her or give her, that whether a husband educate her or give her the permission to go out and seek knowledge. So, okay, maybe I should edit that. So he's saying here, if a woman asks to write, so a woman, first of all, she's not be educated, she has the right to ask the imam or husband to teach her. If he doesn't, she can go to Islamic judge to get the right to education, Islamic education. And he says whether he's going to teach her that or she gets permission to go out and seek knowledge in Islamic, right, countries or institutions, right? And then he says, then it's an obligation on the hakim to force her husband to accept her demand as he, right, does in worldly matters, because the rights of a deen are more important. And what he's trying to say here is that when it comes to the worldly matters, like if a husband is not providing for his wife, I believe someone's mic is on. So the husband not providing for his wife, for example, or for example, a husband is not, or a husband, for example, is not able to take care of his responsibility to his children. Again, he's going to be forced by the government, right? The Islamic government to provide those rights. He said, how about religious rights? And then he goes on to say, rather, most of the requests in this era of wives from their husband is only about sustenance, clothing, and affairs of worldly life. As for the matters of religion, then they do not give concern for the most part, nor do they care about it, nor do they think about it. SubhanAllah. This is another problem. The women have to also raise the bar. The women have to also raise the bar. That they need to tell themselves that they're married and not learning their basics of deen, and they're not getting that education, then they need to ask their husbands of that. And we studied before in the feminism class that has some rights to the sisters. So that's another reason that sisters, they get married, and we know when they get married, they're hoping to, inshallah ta'ala, with their husbands to go and learn something, right? Hopefully travel or to get access to more knowledge. But the reality is, no, many husbands falling short there. Yeah, he did die 700. Okay, so That's another interesting one. I find this point very relevant as a solution when it comes to solving the problem that we need to up the level. And the sisters have to ask for their right to learn and also find these opportunities. And a fourth one is, so that was the third one. The fourth one, the misguided preachers. Yeah, we spoke about this before. Misguided preachers who speak about all kinds of topics and they don't teach the basics. And this is one of the big problems that we're having today. You go on YouTube, you have every single lecture you don't need, right? And the lectures that we do need, we don't have. Right? And it's been very important. Sisters have to ask themselves a key question. Who are the sister speakers? Who are the speakers who are speaking to women? What are they teaching them? Are they teaching them about the ahkam al-tahara and salah and aqidah? Or are we talking about things which are very generic, far-fetched, and have to do with the basics? Ilm al-wajib is fard aini. Knowledge is obligatory, which is upon our neck, all of us. That's what we have to learn. But unfortunately, there are many preachers out there, yeah, call them what you want, male or female, who are not doing the job. In fact, they're misguiding us. And look at Ibn Josie writes his time. He said, we live at times when the preachers give poison to guys with anecdotes, chanting poems of love and passion. At this time, it's tasawwuf, Sufism. And this meets an empty heart and will find its way into it and become so entrenched that removing will be difficult to remove. None of these preachers will bother with explaining the obligatory acts or scolding people away from the forbidden. And that's a key litmus test that you can tell yourself who's teaching you, who's not. Someone who's teaching you is teaching what you need to know and to stay away from, what to do. Not the things that you like to hear just because it's interesting. And I'm saying this because even the sisters have to start telling themselves, if we want more sisters at the scholarship level, we need to start doing more classes in which there is some scholarship. Right? And I believe this is one of the problems. I already mentioned the principle. I'm going to remind it again. The right for sisters is to teach is the same way for the men. Men's classes, they're not just reminders. The halaqat, the durus. How come the sister classes, many of them are just like reminders? Why not durus? Why? Who's telling us the sisters can't learn? And this is the problem. We need to, inshallah ta'ala, sisters got to move the needle by reminding themselves we want something better, right? Even if there's children, right? It doesn't have to be intense, the class. It just has to be a class. And again, I'm going to show you examples of sisters, alimat, who learned, and again, they're married, and they did that. And that's what the time period that we're living in is not far removed from the time period that we were before. The idea is once we find the problems, we can find solutions. And the classes don't have to be, they're not really like, what is it called? What's the word for it? Inconsiderate of the people's schedule. Yeah, it can fit into people's schedule. It doesn't have to be very long. It can be short, but it has to be structured. Right? Sister says, I was discussing the teacher today that authentic lecture on hijabs. Yeah, and this is one of the problems. We need more. And inshallah ta'ala, it's already starting, right? Many people have already began. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq. So these are some of the reasons why the situation may look the way it looks. So now when you understand this, we're obviously moving towards the solution, which is that we need more sisters, right, to do da'wah, inspiring them to do it. But also we figure out, okay, if somebody wants to do da'wah, the next step is going to be, okay, how we're going to do da'wah, right? So this is our discussion here. The qualities of the caliph. If you want to be a da'iyah, what do you need? So here I'm going to mention 8, right? 8 of them. And we mentioned some of this already in our classes on the etiquette of da'wah, so I'm just kind of repeating. Number 1, sincerity. Al-ikhlas, you have to be sincere. Because if it's not sincere, it's not going to be for Allah's sake and it won't last. It won't have barakah and blessings. So that's good given. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ وَمَا أُمِرُوا إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ. We have to be sincere. So that's the first one. Number 2, authentic knowledge. You actually have to have the knowledge. So whatever you're teaching, you have to have it understood properly and well-grounded. So it doesn't mean you have to be a scholar necessarily, but what you're teaching, you must be well-informed and well-educated. So it's different between doing da'wah to that which you know and that which you don't know. A scholar who does a big-time da'wah, or a student, senior da'iyah, student knowledge, who's doing da'wah on a wide scale, he and she might know so many different topics, so they're capable of answering many questions. And what I'm talking about, let's say you want to talk to your parents or your family, your cousins, your aunt, or your neighbors about something. You don't have to be a scholar before you teach them. You just have to know enough to teach them on that matter. And we covered it before. The hadith in Bukhari, convey for me, sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, convey for me even if it's one ayah. As Shaykh Ibn Uthaymin explained what that means in Sharh Riyadh al-Salihin. It means that you convey what you know as long as you know, number 1, it's from Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, has to be authentic, and number 2, you understood it. You understood what you're conveying, then you shared that, and that's da'wah. So let's say right now you're attending the Tuesday classes, you learn so many different things. Okay, I'm going to teach somebody about wudu. I know it, understood it properly, share it. If someone asks me another topic, fiqh, I don't know, I don't know. So that's very important to understand the difference between doing something like your da'wah in your capacity, or you could say like a limited versions of da'wah and then high level da'wah, or if somebody's putting himself out there. Right? We're not asking people to do that unless, of course, they're qualified to do it, because that comes with bigger responsibility and more danger. So authentic knowledge, always Quran and Sunnah al Fahm Salaf. That's very important. Number three, patience, sabr. Why? Because when you're doing da'wah, people are not going to be nice. Right? People are going to look at you and say, well, I don't agree with you. Or sometimes you may tell someone something, they'll say something rude to you. Or sometimes you might put a lot of effort in, you might not get much out of it initially. And that's what you feel, but you don't know. So you always have to be patient. It's not about what people are doing and saying, it's for Allah. Luqman alayhi salam, what did he tell his son when it comes to da'wah? Wasbir ala ma asabak, and be patient at which will come your way. Right. So it's very important that we be patient. Patience is one of the most important elements. Number four, truthfulness, that you're actually truthful in what you're teaching and sharing with people, that you teach them and you practice what you preach. Very important, as we'll see later. That's one of the best forms of da'wah, is your actual actions. And leniency. Right? Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is very lenient when he gives da'wah. Of course, we spoke about this in more detail in those classes about da'wah, but the idea is the origin is leniency, and when needed, you go into harshness. So sometimes you're harsh and sometimes you're lenient, but the origin is that you're lenient. In Allah Allah is all kind and loves kindness. So you must start with that. So an example we look at from the hadith, the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when the man came and urinated in the masjid, how did he interact with him? So that's very important. What did he say to him? Well, he first let him finish, and then later he told him to come closer, and he explained to him, there's a masjid, we can't do these kinds of things. The man never forgot that, and he never did that again. You see, real da'wah has long-term impacts. He never did it again. He got the message. But imagine he sallallahu alaihi wasallam used harshness at that stage. The first problem will be, as the scholars explained, that he didn't stop him when he was urinating because he didn't want him to make a bigger mess. Nabi Sallallahu Faqih is a jurist, a scholar. He's urinating one place, let's not make it bigger. And number two, the man who gets scared by coming to the masjid, his first interaction was what? Yelling and shouting. Imagine, he doesn't know what a masjid even is. He didn't know that. But now what he's introduced to is that people are just yell and shout here. So obviously leniency is the key, but that's not always the case. As we said, sometimes you have to use harshness. But remember that leniency has a lot of benefit. Number six, following the methodology of Salaf Salih, very important. The blessed da'i is the one upon the way of the Sahaba and the Tabi'un, Atba'u Tabi'un, or Atba'u Tabi'in. You have to follow their way. That means when we quote ayat or cite hadith or we try to follow something, it's always what the pious predecessors did, because their religion is what Allah is pleased with. They're the best followers of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So it's very important as a condition for da'i and the qualities that you follow the manhaj salafi. You can't say yourself, I'm going to follow my own methodology. And the reason I think we need to emphasize this is there's lots of da'wah going on online, but a lot of it is not correct or might not be in accordance to what this earlier scholars did. And their da'wah is the most blessed, and their da'wah is the most accepted. If it wasn't any good, they would have proceeded us to it. And I'm going to use today, as part of my presentation, examples of female scholars before us, right? And then those, of course, from the Sahabiyat. Those are our role models. Because if we want to be guided, we got to do what they did. So it's very important to always remember that everyone agrees to the Quran and Sunnah. Where we're different is at times interpretation. And the best interpretation of the deen is the one that the Quran and Sunnah tell us to follow. Number seven, avoiding extremism. Of course, it goes without saying, extremism is very dangerous, but also removes your da'wah. It hinders your da'wah and it makes it not palatable to people. Extremism on two sides, too lenient or too harsh. So sometimes it's for beginners and youngsters, it's the extremism of being too harsh. You take something which is it's mas'ala, or from the masail ikhtilafiyya, it's a mas'ala which is difference opinion, an issue with a difference opinion, and you made it ijma'. See, this is not correct. It's not a ijma' consensus. You need to explain, you need to unpack, you need to break down issues to people. But if it's not a ijma' issue, how could you take it as ijma'? As long as the person who's taking a second opinion actually is a valid opinion out there. But let's say something isn't a valid opinion. Okay, how do I deal with this? I have to remember the da'wah is going to be done with leniency, with knowledge, wisdom, with patience. To be extreme is no good, right? And extremism doesn't mean that you're stand firm. It means that what you're doing, the position you're taking, or the moment you are in, you're not doing what's guided. You're not doing what's in accordance to the Quran and Sunnah. You're not being moderate and not being just. And the last one is a good character. As we'll see, your character is da'wah. Because as soon as you label yourself as a caller to Allah, people are going to scrutinize you. They're going to watch you carefully, what you say and what you do. So therefore, you always have to be in the best of behavior and manners for Allah's sake. And we'll see that sometimes you don't have to say anything. And that's the greatest form of da'wah, especially with family. Especially with family. Family, they don't listen to what we say, they look at what we do. So be careful, right? When you're doing da'wah at home, no one listens to you. You know, but you're nobody at home, right? It doesn't matter what you know. It's what you do. And when they see your actions align with your speech, when they see your actions, and mashallah, and I'm going to show you a beautiful quote Sheikh Salih al-Sheikh is going to mention about such an important part of character at home is trying to set people a realistic standard of religiosity. When they see us, they're looking at us with a very important question. Anybody who is not practicing or a non-Muslim who's interested in Islam, the first thing they're looking at is the Muslims. Can I be like this person? Is their example even realistic? So very important. Is this realistic? Is this moderate? Is this livable? Is this doable? It means, are you living a lifestyle which is, again, Quran and Sunnah, but it's also something which is it's considered moderate. Sometimes when we're very religious, again, which is very good, but some people may look at it like, oh, subhanAllah, I can never become like that. Because obviously what they're thinking is that this is all there is. We know religion and practice of deen is a gradation from not so practicing to more practicing. But we need to also show people that there is a balance. And inshallah ta'ala, we'll see what the statement of Sheikh Salih al-Sheikh ta'ala about this. Okay. Once somebody has accomplished these qualities, and it's very important, to try our best. And again, there's more qualities, but these are the some of the most major ones. Right, wisdom is also included, right? But it kind of falls into patience and knowledge. Let's move along to doing the next part, which is right, this statement here. Sheikh Salih al-Sheikh ta'ala says, it is upon the female callers of Allah to be firm and strong in their beneficial knowledge, as well as constantly answering Allah in that which He calls her to from righteous actions. So the key the Sheikh talks about in the book, right, which is our resource for this presentation, firm. He talks about firmness and knowledge and being strong. You have to be well grounded in your knowledge in order to interact with different opinions, in order to explain to people. And remember, when you have good knowledge, you're not scared or worried about conversation and discussion because you know the topic very well. It also removes the need or sometimes the temptation to fall into an emotional response. Like, we don't need to be emotional about some things, even though we're human beings. We get sometimes we get a little bit overwhelmed by when someone challenging us or maybe asks us a question we didn't think would come. As human beings, it's human nature. But what you do is you gotta think, okay, it's knowledge. Alhamdulillah, let's discuss. So being grounded in knowledge is very important. It's very important. That's a great benefit in allowing the person to see, not that you're calling to yourself, but you're calling to the Quran and Sunnah. From the Quran and Sunnah back to the Quran and Sunnah. Okay. Now, Sheikh Salih al-Sheikh, he mentions in the book something which will be the foundation for the rest of what we're going to do, the need to revive the legacy of female callers. If we want the sisters to be up in da'wah and to be encouraged to do more da'wah the right way, we need to show them examples. Look, Sheikh Salih Sheikh writes or says there are many different examples of the ways the women of the pious predecessors in terms of worship, interaction with others, the way they carry themselves in their homes, in terms of keeping family ties. In the history of Islam, we find that there were many great women scholars. They were known to have obtained knowledge and memorized. There were many of the scholars that were reported have taken even narrated from them. And so male scholars means who studied with them. When we look at the different narrations, we find that many of these narrations have come through some of these women scholars of hadith. So this is something we all know. The female scholars of hadith and fiqh are many. Continuing, these examples give the people the desire and love for knowledge, as this is the way of the scholars and the way of the pious predecessors. The women scholars used to get the knowledge from both women and men, and finally some of them were reported to have taken knowledge from women as well. Many of present situations cannot be solved. This is not Sheikh's issue. Cannot be solved by ways of pointing at other situations or trying to figure out different opinions and ways to look at things. But rather, if some examples are laid out, then we will see a lot of benefit received. So in my opinion, the Sheikh's opinion, showing some of these different examples of these people is very important in terms of rejuvenating the efforts as well as laying away for the mannerisms. So what is the Sheikh trying to say? In order to get the sisters to show them what da'wah will look like for a woman, we need to revisit the examples of who? The female scholars who did it before. And I think this statement of the Sheikh is very, very, very important because this is exactly what we should be doing when we ask ourselves the question, what is the role of women in da'wah? It will not benefit us if I told you, well, let's just give examples of people today. People today are not the role models. People today are following the role models. Yes, there are many female scholars today who are doing great work, but they're following who? Those came before. And that's the whole point. Now, if we try to model right what we're looking for, and now sisters may often find that when it comes to the class and the biographies of the great men, and there are so many. In fact, that's one of the reasons why when many times the du'at and the students of knowledge and the shuyukh want to get inspiration, they open the books of biographies to great imams who strove in da'wah and khair and were trialed, and they get, they get that inspiration. But for many of the sisters, they look around and say, well, we're not finding too many of those examples, or at least not readily available. And that may be sometimes what might dampen the ambition, right? Because again, you can't find an example for yourself. But that's not the truth, right? The truth is there are examples. So to that end, inshallah, I'm going to talk about, for the sake of time, just three examples. Right? In the talk I did in the UK, I mentioned 5 examples, but today I'm going to mention 3 because obviously we're doing more. So we're mentioning more things. So I'm going to just mention 3. And we're going to look at their da'wah and what they did, how we can take lessons from their efforts. And we also know, right, we did our 4-hour class, Elevating Our Sisters series about lessons of the greatest women in Islam. If you have more of those great examples of women heroes and heroines, we have them, right? So it's very important that as Muslims, we continue to add, because for many sisters, they don't see this, right? They don't know this, and they think to themselves, well, I cannot imagine, for example, that I can do anything, great in knowledge and da'wah because I don't see the examples, out of sight, out of mind. But here we go. We're going to look at some examples. And what we're going to highlight from them is the key points, right? And not only biography, but what they were doing. How were they servicing the women? So the first one we mentioned before in our series, we're going to mention her again, Sheikha Fatima bint Abbas al-Baghdadiyya. And probably she is considered one of the greatest of the latter scholars of women, and one of probably the most beneficial, right, and probably the most influential of those who did da'wah. As we'll see the examples of life. Fatima, Sheikha Fatima bint Abbas al-Baghdadiyya. Hafid ibn Kathir, he writes about her because she's a contemporary, right? She died 714 Hijri. She's a contemporary of Ibn Kathir, student of Shaykh Islam Taymiyyah, a contemporary of Ibn Zahabi, Ibn Qayyim. This is her time period. And I want you just to imagine that there's a scholar amongst the sisters at that time who was as knowledgeable as some of the men scholars. Just very, very important. Ibn Kathir writes about her, the righteous Shaykh, the devout worshipper, Zainab Fatima bin Abbas bin Abi al-Fath bin Muhammad al-Baghdadiyya. She passed away in Zahir in Cairo. A lot of people witnessed her funeral. And he sees a lot of people. And she was from the virtuous female scholars who enjoined the good and prohibited the evil. She stood against the Ahmadiyya sect, which was a Sufi order at that time. Shaykh Islam Taymiyyah has a risala about them. Ahmadiyya, the Ahmadiyya, not today Qaadir. Ahmadiyya at that time were a sect that used to do trickery. What they used to do is they used to pretend to have like miracles, but they didn't, jumping through fire and coming out. So Shaykh Islam Taymiyyah, he challenged them one day in front of the ruler in a great event, and that guided many people back to Sunnah. When Shaykh Islam Taymiyyah and them, they obviously claimed they do miracles, jump through fires, like unburnt. So Ibn Taymiyyah said, okay, let's go. Me and you are going to jump in front of the fire, be in front of the Wali al-Amr, the ruler, and we're going to see who's going to come out. So Ibn Taymiyyah already knew that what they're doing is they're using special liquid in which they cover their bodies, most likely vinegar or something like this, so they could not get burnt. So what does Shaykh Islam Taymiyyah said, right? So before we go in, it wasn't vinegar, it was something like that. So he said, before we go in, we're going to wash in vinegar to remove any oils, then we're going to jump in. Of course, Ibn Taymiyyah, he's onto them, right? He knows exactly what they're doing. So they got scared and they didn't come. Now, Shaykh Islam was ready to jump in the fire like that. SubhanAllah. Imagine everyone was shocked. Are you going to jump in the fire? I said, yes, because he has strong faith in Allah. Allah will protect him. Allah said. So they mentioned the story. He mentions himself. He narrates it in the Risala that when that happened, he ran away. And a lot of people were guided right back to the Sunnah because they saw how firm Taymiyyah was. So not only he was detesting them, Shaykh Fatima, she was also detesting them because what? They had relationships with women and men, yani inappropriate relationships or nearness to men and women. And this is one of the problems that was happening at the time. right? And if you want more on this, you can see there's many biographers talk about it. That some of the Sufi orders, again, I'm not saying this is the characteristics of Sufism, but some of them were abusing authority, spiritual abuse. So in any case, she tested their situation and situation of people innovation. Right, look at that. Can women enjoy the good, forbid the evil? Yes. Yes, they can. Right? And sometimes we might tell them they can't. They can't. And again, it's a discussion. How does it look? That's a different discussion. All right. But this is one of the examples of what she did. And she did what men were not capable of doing in that regard. She used to attend the gathering of Taqiyuddin ibn Taymiyyah and she benefited from him and others. Sheikh Taqiyuddin praised her. Sheikh Salam Taymiyyah praised her and described her with virtue and knowledge. And he mentioned that she memorized Al-Mughni of Ibn Qudama or most of it. As-salam. Allahu Akbar. How big is Al-Mughni? Ibn Qudama. It depends what print you have. It could be 20 volumes. Hanbali fiqh. No, fiqh of all four madhabs. He memorized all of it or most of it. And he, Ibn Taymiyyah, used to prepare for her in his classes. He used to prepare whenever he met her due to her many good questions and her quick understanding. She helped many women complete the Quran, I should say, entire Quran. She helped, this is the key here. I'm highlighting these points for a reason. She helped many sisters finish the Quran. And from them, Ibn Kathir says, my mother-in-law, Aisha bin Siddiq, the wife of Shaykh Jamaluddin Mizzi, right? Mizzi is another contemporary of the Ibn Taymiyyah Ibn Kathir. He's the Shaykh al-Hadith at that time. Tahdib al-Kamal, he was the one who wrote it, the great hadith scholar. So his mother-in-law memorized Quran with her, and in turn, who taught her daughter, my wife, his wife, Amatul Rahim, Zainab. May Allah have mercy upon them all, and honor them with the mercy in paradise. Ameen. When we look at just these lines I highlight, look at the level of her knowledge, and look what she's doing. Right? She's commanding the good, enjoying the good, and commanding and prohibiting the evil. But what she's doing with women, she's helping them memorize the Quran. Okay, hold that for a second, the idea. Continue. Imam Zahabi writes about her in Al-Ibr fi Khabar man Ghabar. Many women benefit from her and repent at her hands. Sisters may tell about her hands because we're good reminders. The women in Damascus were rectified through her than the women in Egypt. And Imam Zahabi said, I visited her once. Now, what's interesting is that she used to stay in Damascus till she moved to Egypt, and she has another group of people guided, and she did some bigger da'wah in Egypt. And her da'wah is always for women. It's exclusive to women. This is very important for sisters to see that nobody should be telling us that sisters have to teach men in order for them to have any kind of effort. She taught women. And what she's teaching them, the whole Quran, fiqh, my big topics, as we'll see in a second. Safadi, he writes in his Ayan al-Asab that there's a story that happened between him, the Shafi'i faqih, Sadruddin ibn Wakil, and they debated about many issues. One of them was the issue of menstruation. So she said to him, Shaykh Fatima said to Sadruddin al-Wakil, Ibn Wakil, you know this topic, the topic of menstruation theoretically, and I know it both theoretically and practically, because she's a woman. And of course, Sadruddin after that had no response, right? Because he's right, she knows it better than him. And of course, another Safadi mentioned another part of that quote that when she spoke to him, she showed him the ocean of her knowledge on these issues, and he couldn't say anything. She's more Hanbali, she's Hanbali, he's Shafi'i. Hence why they were debating maybe. Now the most interesting part, she used to teach an institution known as Ribat al-Baghdadiyya. Okay, this is the part that is very interesting. And Maqrizi, he writes about this in his Kitab Mu'ad wal-I'tibar, Kitab al-Khitab. He talks about there that there was many ribat. Ribatat or ribat, it's like the best way to explain it is it's an institution. It's an institution that's designed for housing people for the sake of Allah who are needy or downtrodden. This is the best way to describe it. As he describes himself, something along those lines. This one was called a Baghdadiyya, and again, because it's nicknamed after her. But she wasn't built by her, but she took over the role. And it was an institute built to teach and nurture women. Pay attention here, sisters. Teach and nurture women. So it was built by one of the sisters, one of the sheikhs, and as she came, when she migrated from Damascus to Egypt, and Sheikh Fatima, she joined, and when she joined, she had such a great influence on them that due to strong influence, any teacher who taught in the Ribat was later called, it was called a Baghdadiyya, right, following her. Right, so this Ribat is kind of like you could say like a women's only institute, but also it offered facilities for women who were divorced and who were boycotted by their spouses until they were able to remarry or rectify the situation with their spouses. That's the part that's interesting. It was a place for nurturing and tarbiyah. So some of the sisters, it's like almost like a halfway house in today's time. It's like a halfway house. Sisters who were divorced would come there and she would nurture them and teach them and educate them, remind them. And many of them became guided. And then Al-Maqrizi, he talks about his time period that he got after she died. Sheikh Fatima, another Sheikh took it, and it kept going until it got really bad, the situation. And because of the Egypt was getting worse, a fitna was happening. Around the year 806, around there, he says that it became so bad that any sister who went to study there would get arrested. Yeah, in the area, right? To go study there, will go to jail. So people started leaving it, and it just became like eventually they said it continued, but it wasn't the same. I wanted to think about this today. You talk about women's own institutions. These are the examples. This sheikha, she's one of the big examples, right? Again, knowledge at what level? Ibn Taymiyyah is praising you. They have that kind of tazkiyah. You're at that level. And when she does her lectures, I'm going to explain later, it's primarily women focused, right? It's women focused classes. So just think about her example for a second. Another example, Sheikha Khadija bint Ali bint Ibn al-Mulaqqin, I should say, right? I want to change the Ibn al-Mulaqqin. Ibn al-Mulaqqin is a great Imam Hadith. Many of us might know about him. This is his granddaughter, Sheikha Khadija bint Ali. Imam Sakhawi writes in Dawah al-Lami', she studied in her young age a little of the Quran and knowledge, and she studied writing. Rather, she used to benefit the women in chapter administration and the likes. Again, I highlighted that point that she used to give fatwa or verdicts or answers and benefits to her sisters regarding menstruation. Okay, sister teaching other sisters about these matters. Okay, one more example, Sheikh Khadija bint Yusuf bin Ghanima al-Baghdadiyah, 699 Hijri. And Dhahabi writes, she was born in the year 622, 26 Hijri, and she heard from Ibn Muqayyir, so I mentioned all these teachers. I'm going to mention here, her father used to work in the public baths, and he taught her how to write. And she strengthened her writing under Ibn Shiwai, and Walwali, Ibn Najjar, Ibn Radi Tunisi, and she read a number of introductory books of grammar, Arab. She used to give reminders at ceremonies for the condolences. This is what she used to do. You know, like today we call the Aza, right? Right. So when there's like a kind of like someone passed away, and she became proficient in it. And she made Hajj and left giving reminders, and she was wife of Hajj Mahmud al-Dhahabi. She died 699 Hijri. Okay, reminders for women, right? Even those in the capacity of condolences, I'm going to say, can you give, is having like uh condolences or like ceremonies even something permitted? Again, it's difference of opinion amongst scholars, but I mean, maybe if their view that was allowed. But remind this woman, and I want to highlight the import. Her father used to work in the public baths. She doesn't come from a scholarly background. Again, some of the sisters say and ask this question: how can I learn to deen? My scholar, my father doesn't know anything, my brother doesn't know anything, no one family knows anything. We tell them, yes, many of us we come from that because those kinds of backgrounds where none of our family members are ahead in. But knowledge is not given on to people who come from households of scholarship. Yes, those people are more likely to become scholars. But then, as you see the example, someone who works, her father works in the public baths. Public baths like today's like a sauna like that. He taught her how to write, and the rest she learned from her sheikh. This shows again examples of great role models. They don't always come from what we might imagine. So these three examples are of many, amongst many. There's so many. Show us that women who are doing work for women by teaching them, guiding them, admonishing them, doing tarbiyah, building institutions. Sisters can do da'wah in those regards. But when we talk about da'wah today, if we see these great scholars, their level of knowledge is the first thing that comes to mind. They're so knowledgeable. And that shows that scholarship for women and men is something which is equal. And number two, that they're working with the women. They were not working with the men. Now, somebody may ask yourself today, well, today's trend, we find many sisters, when they want to do da'wah, they teach men and women. And this is not correct, as we'll see, because women, number one, deserve that treatment more. Women need other women teachers for not only the transmission of knowledge, but the transmission of etiquette and character. And number two, while the men can teach the women, as Nabi Sallallahu used to teach them, the women also, at time of Sahaba, right, Aisha, for example, others, used to teach the women. So women teaching women is very, very important, right? Because women can learn best from women. But when we see today women teaching both men and women, is this, number one, Islamically correct? That's the first question we're going to ask. But number two, we're also going to ask, is what is needed in our community? So Islamically is not correct. But more importantly, is this what's needed? You need to see that we have to think of priorities and focus. If a sister is capable of teaching other sisters, why is it that she's trying to teach in public forums with other men there? Some may say, well, what's the benefit about it? Is there a shortage of men teachers? No. And why would then she not focus primarily on sisters and give her all their attention? These are the questions that we need to ask, and we can't hide from it. Because the greatest examples we ever seen of female da'iyas, and I haven't got to sahabiyat yet, they did that. Now that we have this much, we need to round up by talking about how can women get involved in da'wah. And the first thing we have to do, we have to establish the two ways of doing da'wah, the wasa'il, the means. And the scholars, they explain that the means of da'wah are of two types. Number one, intangible, wasa'il al-ma'nawiyya. Wasa'il al-ma'nawiyya, which is the intangible means of da'wah, which is your character, your manners, the way you carry yourself. This is a type of da'wah. Wasil min wasa'il da'wah. Yes, very important. And number two, the tangible, the one we all think about, writing, teaching, admonishing, posting online. All these are called the wasair al-hissiyya, the tangible means. Most people, when they think about da'wah, the question that they're exploring is tangible means. Oh, how can I give da'wah? How can sisters give da'wah? Should they write books? Should they post online, Instagram, TikTok, whatever? But we need to first start here. If women are spending, for example, a lot more time at home with their family and their kids or with their fellow sisters, they're obviously going to be engaged in both forms of da'wah. But even men, the real da'wah that you can start with without even opening your mouth is who you are, your character. And I think sometimes we underestimate, in fact, we may even downplay this type of da'wah. And I think it's a mistake, right? Because look where the conversation is today when we talk about da'wah. Everyone's discussing with women, okay, can women go on the camera or not go on the camera? Why don't we talk about sister's character, how to develop her more closer to the example of sahabiyat and more now? See, we're missing, we're moving away from the most important parts, the qualities of da'wah. You can guide someone by just being you. I'm going to show you an example on it. And in case anyone tries to downplay this and saying that's like, yeah, that's not important. It's very important because most of the da'wah we do is what people are looking at, right? They're not seeing you. They're not talking to you. They're just watching you. So both elements sisters have to da'wah in who they are, their akhlaq and their stuff, and also how they can gain intangible methods. Let's first establish the intangible one. Sheikh Ibn Uthaymeen, we went to this before, in his fatwa when he came to America in the year 2001, the year he died. Sheikh Ibn Uthaymeen came to Boston, Massachusetts, to get treatment for his sickness. So when he was there, they asked him about how to give da'wah in the West. And he said, if these people, the kuffar, the disbelievers, see you truthful in speech, fulfilling your contracts, far away from cheating and betrayal, then that is the strongest da'wah to religion of Islam. They just see you behaving like a Muslim, then that's da'wah to Islam. You see, sometimes we forget that people are watching us. If they see me cutting corners, cheating people, lying, they'll be like, okay, this must be a Muslim. This must be Islam. So character is very important. And for the person who you talk to, every person you talk to, right? There's another person who you don't talk to. Okay, it's very important. Every person you talk to, there's another person who you don't talk to. Somebody's watching you. Okay. طيب, now let's talk about the hadith. Sahih Sunan Abi Dawud, also found in Bukhari and others, the shorter version, this is the longer version. The Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam sent some horsemen to Najd, and they bought a man from Banu Hanifa called Thumama bint Uthal, who was the chief of the people of Yamama, and bound him to one that pillars the mosque. So who's Thumama? Thumama was leader of the Bani, of the chief of the Yamama tribe, people of Yamama, and he was someone who has a history of Islam. As you'll see, he killed some of the Sahaba. So Messenger tied him to the masjid pillar. And he came to him and said, what are you expecting, Thumama? And what should we do with you? And he replied, I expect good, Muhammad. If you killed me, you'll kill one whose blood will be avenged, because he killed other of his Sahaba. And he said, if you show me favor, you'll show it to one who's grateful. And if you want property, and ask, and you'll be given as much as you wish. Because he's the leader, right? So he's giving him a choice. You want to kill me? You have all right to. You want to pardon me? That's very good. If you want to ask for money ransom, I got enough money. Give me, ask what you want. Messenger left him till the following day. Look at this. Next day, what are you expecting to Mama? Same words. Prophet left him the second day, third day, again, same words. 3 days, he left him hanging, tied to the masjid. Messenger then said to Sahaba, free him. He went off to some palm trees near the mosque. He took a bath and there entered the masjid and said, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa anna Muhammad Rasulullah. He became Muslim. I have a question. What da'wah Nabi Sallallahu did to Sumama here? How he became Muslim? What did he say? What did he tell him? Prophet Sallallahu left him to stand, to be tied in the masjid for 3 days to observe the Sahaba and Rasul Sallallahu akhlaq and what they do in the masjid. When he fell for 3 days, what they do? Ruhama'u baynahum, Allah says, mercy amongst each other. Sahaba doing ibadah, salah, the qira'ah, the Quran, the mudhakar of ilm. He just looked at that. Khalas, he became Muslim. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Allah, nowadays, when we look at us as Muslims, someone were to come inside our masjid or any masjid, would they have those similar feelings? That's the question we need to ask ourselves. This is a very important question. Today, we need to ask ourselves that question. Someone walked in the masjid today, is he going to look at it and say, Allahu Akbar, I want to be like these people? Or is he going to say, La hawla wa quwwata illa billah, what is this? Right? Well, someone asks him, just like, you could take this, yeah, here it is. So I think it's very important. The example of Thamama, min akhlaq. Of course, it doesn't mean Nabi Sallallahu didn't used to give da'wah otherwise, but I'm just saying the emphasis. Now I'm going to, let the people, whoever wants to take this slide down, inshallah, let them take it down. I'm going to show in a second Sheikh Salih and Sheikh's advice about the issue of akhlaq and sisters. And I think it's very important to start with this, just to remind us that we need to think about da'wah holistically. Inshallah, when we're done, just let me know. Okay, inshallah. Now, let's talk about this statement. Sheikh Salih al-Sheikh, he writes in his kitab, or the book that we're citing, The Female Caller, in different ways to call to Allah. Knowing how to properly interact is something the female college and teachers must pay close attention to because it is directly tied into how we care ourselves. We are in dire need these days of knowing and teaching how to interact with others in terms of our composure as well as mannerisms. Everyone notices all that comes from the female college when it comes to her speech and actions. Everything that she says and does will be attributed to Islam. Very important advice. Whatever you do, once you see your da'iyah, everyone's going to say that's what Islam is. He says it will be said that this action is that which is legislated, this action for the proper way, and this is what the religion calls us to. So if she were to begin to work off, and then talks about extremism. Now he says some sisters, when they become religious, and try to be upright, which is something that she is thankful for, she begins to do some things in her house that is unacceptable to those that live with her. So they see that with that which she is upon or does, that is impossible for others to apply in their lives because she does not have a proper way to carry out these actions or things so that they are acceptable by others. She begins to deal with and talk to everyone like they are on the same level. She does not differentiate between those in authority and those others in charge of adults and children. As well, she does not make a difference between talking and dealing with her father and mother or spouse. And this shows the lack of wisdom in her. Allahu Akbar. Today, we know this. When we all become practicing, we have those problems with our parents. We have those problems with, our relatives, with our husbands, wives, children. We treat the people in accordance to our level. Someone of authority, you can't command, you can only advise. A nice way. Someone who's underneath you, you have more power and ability to teach. But also, I like what the Sheikhs mentioned here, building acceptable standards. Sometimes you may learn something which goes against a second opinion that opinion that your household holds. If it's a mas'ala which is ikhtilafi, right? It's a difference of opinion. One is stronger, one is weaker. What should you do about it? So there's hikmah. Should I change it? Should I advise them? Should I introduce to them the stronger view? Or should I leave that off in priority for something bigger, which is like Tawheed and Sunnah and Manhaj, methodology of the deen? You have to pick, right? But what happens sometimes, we make everything the same. Fiqh and Aqeedah becomes the same, all the same. And what happens? You make a mountain out of a molehill. something which you could have talked about, you make it something fard. And there's no point of this, because when you start to draw lines, just remember, those are the things you're going to live and die by. And for many of us, I find that this is the problem we might find, that we may see, that we're actually going to put ourselves in that situation, right? That a lot of the sisters, they notice this, that when you start teaching, you're going to find yourself in that situation. And you're cutting, drawing lines, and you're picking battles and things not to be fought. To finish, if this is the example of good akhlaq, if you work on your manners and morals, your delivery, interaction with people, that's the first da'wah, first element of da'wah. And this will help a lot, because people look at you as someone reasonable, just, fair-minded, easygoing, but knowledgeable, firm when it to be firm, lenient when it to be lenient. This is key. Because if the people look at you and say, well, if I become practicing, I'm going to become intolerable. How about the phenomenon we find sometimes when we're doing da'wah, we tend to be controversial, because most of us, we think initially, maybe it's more of a, when you're younger, you think being contrarian is the closer to the truth. So you like to oppose everything just because. And it's very important. You can't just oppose because opposition is good. Right? It's good to have agreement. Al-khilaf shar, right? Differing is evil. So you differ with the wisdom and knowledge. And you have to think about these things, especially when you are practicing at home. So I highly recommend the intangible qualities to begin with. To try to work on our people skills and who we are, because people, when they see you, they become guided. They look at you and remember of Allah. And I can attest to that. Personally, a lot of the da'wah that we're trying to win is just how we interact with people. The next step then is the actual bread and butter. What can sisters do? An actual tangible method. Well, here are some examples, and some of them we can draw from the scholars we cited earlier, and some of them we can draw from the examples I'm going to cite from Abdul Sahabiyat. So the first one we see is private sisters only classes. The sisters who are teaching can teach others. Very important. Zakat al-ilm. Number two, women can write to the public. Writing, she can write it and post it online. Articles, books, whatever. And it's very good. Sisters can also engage in counseling and guiding sisters with their problems and issues. How many issues the sisters have? Who's teaching the sisters? Very important. Many times we forget. We're talking about counseling. Counseling is not necessarily knowledge. It's about, I need help. I have a problem. So we need someone to give me nasiha. And that counts. Is part of da'wah, right? This is very important. Many people, you see them today, they're not focused on this. Everyone's talking about knowledge, but then people have problems. They don't need necessarily a fatwa. They just need some sympathy. Very important, because we know, for example, our teacher and the Imam of Fajr or Masjid, he can't take every phone call, right? Eventually, we hope that one day will come that there'll be qualified sisters who can pick up the phone for the sisters. And even if you're not, you don't have to be an Imam to even do that, right? You can do it on your own. That's part of da'wah. And you did it. I'm sure many of us are doing it already. Very good. It's a very good thing, because Islam is practical. And sometimes, again, here's the thing: we need to ask ourselves. No one knows what you do, right? Only Allah sees you. But today, some of us, we think about, subhanAllah, that's not a visible da'wah. What does da'wah have to be visibility? Right? Think about it. All the Aisha radiallahu anha, she did. Visibility, was it visible or was it beneficial? Fourth, in her home with her family and kids, teaching her kids. One of the greatest testimony to her da'wah is her own children, or husband, or family, or those around them. That's a sign that knowledge is benefiting. And the fifth one, which is the one that we find today, the conversations often revolving around online da'wah. But we can engage in online da'wah in most things, but not some things. The one that's the contentious one, I put the article there. We posted a long time ago. Women coming in front of cameras, or women giving lectures in public to men. This is not correct. It goes against the example of all the Sahabiyat, the head of them being the Shaykh, the Alima, the most knowledgeable female scholars in the history of Islam, Aisha radiallahu anha. She used to teach behind the veil. So this is the first benefit. If anyone's going to say to us today, this is something that's allowed, we need someone to oppose the way of Aisha radiallahu anha. She teaches, in the Bukhari, in his Tariq, he mentions, she teaches the hadith, she's teaching the people from behind the veil. Is anyone more knowledgeable than Aisha? Anyone more beneficial than Aisha? Anyone more learned than Aisha? Who learned from who? The Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam. This is one of the most important things. So we need to stop moving away from those examples and towards something which we don't have strong evidence for. I'm going to discuss in a second. And we go back to the ayah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, وَإِذَا سَأَلْتُمُوهُنَّ مَتَاعًا. If you're going to ask the woman something, فَاسْأَلُوهُنَّ مِنْ وَرَاءِ حِجَابٍ. Ask them from behind the veil. And if you go back to the article, shall you see the long fatwa and the different fatwa and the proofs as to why women should not do that. And the reason I'm highlighting this because I think it is not correct to talk about da'wah and limit it. Imagine all the affairs da'wah. Women can do editing audios and content da'wah, flyers, leaflets, brochures, so many things they can do online. And we're telling them you have to go on camera and you have to let other strange men look at you. Is this da'wah? Is this what we're looking at? Now some will say, well, what if the people are lowering their gaze and what if this? Let's be honest. The people are not all the same. And the men who are there to teach the men, and even the men who teach the women, they should do it from behind the veil, right? And as we find today, we have online things like Zoom. How else we can add social media? Alhamdulillah, now the sisters, they have right, Telegram, there's WhatsApp groups. We have to take advantage. Time of Sahabiyat, the ulama in the past, they didn't have that. The alimat didn't have that. We have it. Question we should ask, what capacity can we give da'wah? Some may say, brother, I'm not confident, I don't know much. Good. You don't have to be a scholar, I said. Do you have a pamphlet? Do you have a book? Do you have something you wrote down? Do you have notes? Do you want to go and cut an audio? Do you want to go and make? We need to do things. I mean, all of us are just adding on to what great benefits already available. But what's happening today is that a lot of times I feel like we're telling the sisters, you got to be like the men. And we already said, ثبت في حق الرجال ثبت في حق النساء إلا مع الدليل. Here we have a delil. Sahabiyah do not do that. The Quran and Sunnah do not tell women to go in front of men and teach. So we got to go and say women to women, men to men. And men, if they're teaching women, is different because we have asr for that. And obviously, even that, we find that we have etiquette. I want to highlight something. Someone will say, well, look, there's actually a proof. And this is something you have to know in case you don't know. And I researched this before, but it is something that comes up. If you go to the example of Sheikh Fatima, there is the example, right? They mention about her that she used to go on the minbar and she used to give lectures to the women. I'm going to cite this example so that you know, right, the reason, because it's very important you already know the shubahat from beforehand. That's part of ilm. Okay, the first thing is that the one who popularized this, right, I'm going to mention his name, or many of us might know, but it's not relevant. But some of the people, they cite this example. I found it's not only him. But other people cite that Fatima, Sheikh Fatima, it's mentioned in biography, that she used to teach the women, and she used to go on the minbar. And As-Safadi, he writes in A'yan al-Asr, volume 2, page 170, that she used to do this. And what happened was that it says in that she used to go on the minbar and advise women. So it looks like it's a minbar just designed for women to teach women, because we said her work was mainly women. But Safadi says it was told to me. Okay, I'm going to say very clear. Wallahu a'lam where Safadi got it from. He said it was narrated to me that one day Shaykh al-Islam Taymiyyah, who praised her, he said that he has a problem with what Sheikh Fatima is doing, because she's teaching on the minbar and she's teaching towards a mixed audience, men and women. Again, and I'm going to cite again. Safadi said it was told to me. It was narrated to me. It reached me. Again, not directly. And then he says, Shaykh Islam Taymiyyah, when he had this thought, should I prohibit her from going to the minbar and teaching in a mixed group or not? I mean, teaching men and women. So he says Ibn Taymiyyah went to sleep, but he got a dream confirming that what she's doing is right. Okay, 1 second here. This story, first of all, that version I just mentioned, Ibn Taymiyyah in the dream and the mixed group, it's only mentioned by Safadi. And anyone who knows anything about Safadi and his works, whenever he talks about Ibn Taymiyyah, and fihi nadar, there's something wrong there. It's not 100% accurate, because Safadi, he had some, I'll say in an easy way, he had some kind of biases. So this is the first problem. Number two, all other reports do not mention that. Mention that she used to go on the minbar for the nisa. So it's a special platform she teaches on to women, for women only, because that's her work. Number three, Safadi is not eyewitness to this report. He said it was narrated to be. From who? We don't know. And fourthly, we have the examples of Quran and Sunnah, Sahabiyah, they oppose it. Then there's no delil in that. And I'm saying this now clearly so we can pay attention to the people who are trying to exploit these examples against what? The example, Aisha and others. I don't know how much time, so I want to leave some time for the question and answers. But we go to books now. The ulama talk about the Sahabiyat, they did both. They had wasail, they used wasail al-ma'nawi, tangible, intangible, and wasail al-hissi, tangible da'wah methods. So for example, Aisha, she used to teach, right? She used to narrate. She used to show people how to make wudu, like one of her free slaves. She used to, for example, give advices to leaders. So we know she does lots of tangible things. When it comes to intangible, her akhlaq, her zuhud, her aestheticism, right? So Aisha, for example, is very aesthetic. She didn't care about dunya. Or, for example, her iman and her following Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, her fear of Allah. So scholars mention so many examples. Another one, Hafsa, radiallahu anha. Right? We know she's very knowledgeable. Nabi Sallallahu actually instructed Shifa to teach her how to write. It's Sahih Sunnah Dawud. Hafsa used to know how to write. Later, Hafsa, she commissioned in Mu'tamarik, it narrates in Mu'tamarik, she commissioned one of her servants to write the Mus'haf down for her. So when he wrote the Mus'haf, he told her, when you get to this ayah, come tell me. Again, Hafsa knows how to write. She has someone teaching someone or instructed someone to write a Mus'haf. When Umar passed away, Abu Bakr, when he compiled the Mus'haf, where did he keep the Mus'haf copy? He kept in the house of Hafsa. Hafsa, very important. Not Ibn Umar, her brother. No, Hafsa. Later, we know Hafsa advised Umar and Ibn Umar about many issues, like Ibn Sayyad. Many of us, we know the story of Ibn Sayyad, the boy who was suspected being Dajjal. It was Hafsa who told Ibn Umar, stay away from him. And if he is Dajjal, it's going to harm you. And he'd give her advice because he told her, he narrated what happened. Hafsa also, we know that she used to fast a lot and she used to pray a lot. Again, these are people who later, when Umar, he died, we also mentioned the Sunan, Umar, في Bukhari actually, to Sahihain, Umar, he left his wealth in charge of Hafsa, his estates, his endowments and his money wealth in her entrustment. So there are many examples we could say this Sahabi had engaged. Salama, we know, she gave advice to Rasulullah. So they were engaged, Sahabi, they were doing different elements. But what's the key? Women to women, very, very important. And I think in today's era, when we look at this, short lecture, we can get inspired, number one, to look at the examples. There are many resources we can read. So again, a reference to the one we started with, inshallah ta'ala, to give us this reference, inshallah, to go back to. And also, as time progresses, to engage in more and more da'wah, for sisters to be involved, to be inspired, inshallah ta'ala, and to eventually this will help grow, right, our da'wah into something which resembles a PLM in the past, where there's classes for women, classes for men, efforts for women, efforts for men, for children, for elderly. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq to reach that level and to go back to the way of the pious predecessors, inshallah ta'ala. I'm going to stop the stream now and take any questions, inshallah ta'ala. If anyone has some questions already here, inshallah, just 1 second.